Okay, I think at that point I'd better pass over to the Chairman.
Thank you. I think we'd like to ask just one or two questions about Afghanistan and its influence, as it were, from the side on the Iraq situation, not to look at Afghanistan in its own right. Roderick.
Yeah, just one, really. You've just mentioned it. In 2004, Jeff Hoon told us that he was against the idea of deploying into more troops into Afghanistan until we'd reduced our commitments in Iraq. In the following year, we decided to take responsibility for Helmand province in Afghanistan and to deploy much larger troop contingent there. And the effect of that was that by the end of 2006, at its peak, we had over 7,000 troops still in Iraq and over 6,000 by then in Afghanistan. Weren't you concerned that this was stretching the resources, both the human and the equipment resources of the army, absolutely to their limits?
Well, I was certainly concerned that we were then fighting in two different theatres of operation. But again, I think the decision actually to go down into Helmand was taken, or began to be taken, in 2005. We were told that we were able to do this and that it was right that we did it. And what was actually happening in Iraq was that, unlike the rest of, or happening in Basra, as I would say it, in the south, as opposed to the rest of the country, is that the problem, in a way, was that people were worried that most of the attacks were actually happening on us, on the coalition forces. And so our concern was that over time we should be building up the Iraqi capability, and then that would allow us to draw down. But we were capable of doing the Helmand mission, and indeed we wouldn't have done it if we weren't.
But it was a stretch, and you were warned that it would be a stretch, presumably.
Actually, the suggestion that we did it came from the MOD. Of course, they said it's going to be tough for us, but they said we can do it and we should do it. And so, in a sense, right at the moment it was difficult in Iraq. We were prepared to make the additional commitment to Afghanistan.
We'd like Mr. Blair to ask a few questions about the strategic direction of government and how one does that in a cabinet system in situations like Iraq. And I think Baroness Bashar would like to start.
Thank you, Chairman. Some questions, Mr. Blair. Just taking your meeting on the 23rd of July in 2002, which you chaired and at which the Chief of Defence Staff put forward some military options. Mm-hmm. And according to Alistair Campbell, you said that you did not want any discussions with other departments at this stage and did not want any of this swimming around the system. Why was the participation restricted to 2 cabinet ministers and not, for example, to the Secretary of State for International Development Secretary?
We were discussing then what was likely to happen in relation to the politics and the diplomacy, particularly in relation to the military. Now, at a later time, as you know, the officials from DFID were involved in the planning meetings. I think
my understanding is that came at a very late stage and after a lot of pressure from...
I think the officials were together. It's true that it was at a later time that Claire Short herself joined the committee. However, having said that, I mean, we were in pretty regular correspondence, and as I say, in the end, DFID acquitted itself perfectly well. The problem we had was not a problem that was capable of being cured by DFID.
No, that's true, but I mean, at an early stage of effective planning to go ahead, you know, you need full departmental engagement, probably a cabinet involvement. Why wasn't Treasury and the DFID involved in the early stages?
Well, we were also discussing this at a cabinet level too. And obviously, I mean, we were in close touch with the Treasury and so on. But right at that moment, the single most important areas were diplomacy and were the issues to do with military planning. And look, I know that much has been made of, well, these were ad hoc committee meetings with a small a and a small h rather than with a large A and a large H. The key thing was to get the key players together so that you could have a proper, frank discussion and take the decisions necessary. And that's really what we did, both before the invasion and afterwards.
That's true, but I mean, Lord Turnbull said, I think you should include people who have a locus, even if they're going to be difficult. Because in a way, if we're going to look at the aftermath reconstruction, DFID and Treasury had a locus.
Sure, but, and I think I said to the as in response to the Butler inquiry, that in future there's a case for having a specially constituted committee. All I would say to you is that we did have the key players, and there was a constant interaction with government on the key issues. Insofar as we were predicting what we would find, we made provision for it, and the relationship between myself and Jack Straw, Jeff Hoon, the politicians, but also the Chief of Defence Staff were close. I mean, we were in close interaction the entire time, and the main bulk of this was going to be done in the first instance by the military. Now, it's correct that as we got into late 2002, early 2003, DFID became a bigger part of the picture. Claire said she wanted to come to meetings. That was fair enough. That then happened. The issue, however, that DFID was focused on was the humanitarian side, and to be fair to them, they did a very good job on it.
As you mentioned the Butler report, I think the chairman has a question on that.
I sat on the Butler Committee, and I don't want to go over old ground. But just to be clear, the Cabinet met frequently in the period 2002 and 3. It's not that they were not consulted, but rather that papers in general, I think, were not circulated. The Butler Committee found none, and we haven't found any, which has given rise to the question that was there sufficient information analysis, both of the issues and about the background, to enable your Cabinet colleagues, who would take full collective responsibility for the big decisions, to understand and, if necessary, challenge within Cabinet discussion?
Look, we had, I think it's 20. I think there was
at least 25.
25 pre-invasion Cabinet discussions of Iraq, and then there was ad hoc ministerial discussions, I think 28 of those meetings. There was a constant interaction, and people would describe, it wasn't just a sort of formal Cabinet discussion. Jack Straw would take people through the information that we had. There was an immense amount going on inside the MOD, inside the Foreign Office, actually inside DFID as well. And I really don't think any of the members of the Cabinet at the time felt they weren't involved or felt they couldn't challenge. Indeed, Robin Cook didn't. Robin and I disagreed about it in the end. Obviously there are these issues to do with the nature of the meetings that were held. But I was in an almost constant interaction for 2002 and 2003 with members of the Cabinet.
You do have, both from two very different witnesses that we've taken testimony from, Alistair Campbell and Lord Turnbull, the same thought that you need to accommodate difference of view and respond to it within a collective, within, in this case, the Cabinet or some smaller grouping, the ad hoc committee, for example. With hindsight, do you think that there was sufficient space and opportunity for those differences to be accommodated and fed in to final judgments?
I really do, actually, yes. Nobody in the Cabinet was unaware of what the whole issue was about. It was the thing running throughout the whole of the political mainstream at the time. And there were members of the Cabinet who would challenge and disagree, but most of them agreed. It was the same with Parliament. I was subject to constant numbers of people telling me, you shouldn't do this, you should do that, you should do it differently, and so on. And in relation to the planning afterwards, I mean, whatever differences Claire Short and I may have had from time to time, the one thing I would never accuse her of being is backward in coming forward. So there was a huge, all the time, interaction, as I say, between people on the very issues.